Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to day 3 of NAB, and it's late on a Wednesday, so I will keep things light today. So I'm Stephen Tripsas. I'm Platform Solutions Architect with Zype. Zype is a complete video distribution and content management infrastructure. We have robust dashboards, APIs, and publishing tools, and we help consumers and customers build great video products at scale. We have publishable apps and endpoints across web, social, mobile, OTT, and connected TV devices. Obviously support for subscription, transaction, and ad monetization. We were founded in 2014, and we are based in New York City. A little brief about some of the components that are a part of Zype, about our video CMS and our app distribution, our live stream platform, and we are up for Product of the Year this year for our new Playout product, which we built on top of our OVP. Here are a list of our few of our current clients and our video innovators that are currently using our product. And one of my favorite slides, Zype is built from the ground up to be an API-first platform. Every single product we build is built by API, and then we build the UI. So you can break the platform up into different modules. You could use parts of it, or use only some of it, or marry parts of it together, from live streaming to playout to CMS, et cetera, some of the monetization and paywalls. But today, I'm going to be talking about a different topic, which is a little bit more down to earth, and a little bit more practical. And I want to talk about live stream distribution and different encoding methodologies and entropies. And the reason for this is, as we started building the Playout product, we realized we really need to put a definition around this. Now, for the Zype Live pipeline as a whole, it's a standard live pipeline. You send a broadcast to Zype, well, Zype will transcode that and throw it into our CMS, as well as put paywalls on it, distribute it to Apple TV, Amazon Fire, Roku, Samsung Tizen, Samsung Galaxy, syndication to Zumo or Opera, or Verizon Oath, obviously all those crazy endpoints that we have today and more to come. Then we push all those changes and your consumers subscribe and watch those playouts, whether they are on-demand live events or 24-hour linear channels. But in doing that, we faced a challenge, and that challenge is the source distribution feeds and the endpoint distribution feeds were coming in with everything as a mixed bag in terms of encoding. They are different frame rates, they are different bit rates, they are different bit rates methodologies, whether they're VBR or CBR. Some of the lower end encoders like Slingbox, or I'm not saying lower end, they're great tools, but they're not set up to send a 10 megabit stream, and that's not their use case. But then you have to mix some of those streams together with those that are not coming in at the same quality or coming in with the same internet speeds or bandwidth. So this is a problem, and it's an industry-wide problem, I believe. So I think what we all need to do is step back and realize the challenge of the day is, should I use VBR, or should I use 2-pass VBR, or when should I use CBR? And that's the topic of today's discussion. All right, so obviously, this is a confusing thing, and I call this the BR paradox. CBR, VBR, MBR, more max bit rate, constrained VBR. What does this all mean? When should we all use them? And I always like to put this up there because remember when eggs were good, and then they were bad, and then, well, it turns out the egg whites are good, but the yolk is really bad, or not too much for the excess. This is that problem that we have with CBR. We don't know when to use it, we don't know when to use it appropriately, and we don't know how much we should leverage it and how much we should dial it up. So let's try to cut through a lot of that right now. All right, so let's go through the basics. CBR. CBR is a constant bit rate, which means that each frame uses the same amount of bits regardless, regardless if it needs them or not. So if I have a stream that's set at 5,000 kilobits per second or 5 megs a second, it's going to try to marry each frame, whether that particular frame's complexity requires that bit rate or not. Now VBR, variable bit rate means that you can vary the amount of bits used to represent a frame so that the overall average amount of bits per frame is achieved. And it does this by stealing bits from less information to encode and giving them to other frames that actually need it. And then obviously, as you can tell, this is also trying to match the 5 megabits per second. But there are peaks and valleys. The frames that have higher complexity are going to be peaked up, and frames that have lower complexity are not going to generate the amount of bits on a per frame encoded level. Now this is stuff we mostly know already. This is all, but when do you use one or the other? So let me go to 2-pass first, and then we'll talk about when do we go to each. 2-pass is VBR again, except it's making a second scan of the media to calculate the bits for each frame. And then it kind of formulates a budget on best where to spend the bits. It is a much better way to encode VOD. It is definitely our preferred method of encoding VOD because you're able to analyze the media prior to calculating the bits in each frame. I'm going to jump down here. Now, practical applications. Now, if I encode a video at 6 megabits per second with CBR and 6 megabits per second with VBR, the VBR will always have the better quality, and that's because it will vary the bit rate based on the complexity in each frame. Some frames will get 8 to 9 megabits per second, others will only get 3 to 4, and we'll end up with an average bit rate of 6 megabits per second. Most CBR, on the other hand, will never give any frame more than 6 megabits per second. And there are frames that obviously need more than 6 megabits per second. As you can see, this is a 1080p side by side at 2,500 kbps or 2.5 megs a second, CBR VBR comparison. As you can tell, frame complexity and phases in general are obviously a lot harder to encode at rate than static images or backgrounds. And as a result, with CBR encoding, the entire frame suffers as a result. And now with live streaming, this is even more complicated, but we'll get into that in a second. Now, I spent a lot of time on this next graph to really analyze visually what I'm trying to talk about today, and I'm sure you guys are going to love it. There you go. All right, bit rate goes up, time goes forward, there's CBR and there's VBR. Whether it's 2-pass or not is not relevant right now. What is relevant is the peaks and valleys. And this is where we started running into our issue with playout and live streaming and our live streaming partners. Now, as you bring on different encoding terminologies or different encoders, different manufacturers, different production houses, you are going to get different graphic slates. You're going to get a cold white slate that then suddenly has full motion. You're going to have a cold black slate that's suddenly going to fade to a completely complicated 3D logo that suddenly throws the entire bitrate and the encoding characteristics off. And in live production, and when you're trying to create a playout stream, this is causing a problem because ultimately your live stream is going to suffer because the encoded rates are not going to be able to handle it. And that's just typical of A, hardware, or B, time. You need to be able to process this in real time, and instead of throwing money at the problem, aka buying bigger encoders, we just need to be smarter about how we encode. Now, first mile distribution, VBR is okay, although a lot of my green screen studios, and from my experience, I will say that CBR typically works better when they're distributing graphics, and that's those hard cuts. But as those hard cuts come along, you could see, as it goes from a single white image to full motion in the studio, the bitrate complexity on a per frame basis is going to jump. And if you have wide keyframe intervals, and if you have wide chunks, your player will buffer, or those frames will drop, or they won't be encoded at all. So I think it's great to come to, I guess, a moment where we all decide which one we want to use. And in that, VBR and 2-pass for constrained is still the staple of the VOD encoding, but because you have the time to encode it. Now, how much time you have is obviously relative on how fast your clients need those assets available, but you have more time. Real-time encoding for live is different. So for the first mile of CBR, and like I said, I have mixed results. That's why I believe that VBR and CBR is still great, depending on the use case. But I think the big key one here is when you are stitching together live streams using CBR to redistribute or syndicate is where you're really going to get the most benefit out of CBR encoding. And now if I have a stream that I have coming in from a live broadcaster and I need to now proxy that over to a third-party CDN who's also going to re-encode it, or I need to re-proxy that over to a syndication partner that's going to chunk it up and then it's going to redistribute it. You want to be able to maintain bitrate qualities because you can't trust anybody else's pipeline to do what you're doing. And as a result, in general, when I'm syndicating content, I CBR as much as possible. And for my use cases, it's helped tremendously. Now I do constrain them, so I have an upper and I have a lower bitrate. So if my average is I want a 6 megabit per second stream, I will do 6 megabits and 400 or 6.4. 6 megabits and 400 kilobits per second. That's 110% over the constraint, which is the maximum bitrate I am trying to achieve, so I can handle some of the peaks and valleys of those frames that are more complex than others. Let me go down here. So in my pipeline, as these syndications that I'm talking about are RTMP or MPEG-TS out to social media platforms like Twitch or YouTube, out to distribution endpoints like the ones that we support today, as well as the playout distribution endpoints, which could be as complex as a Sling TV ingestion or MPEG-TS playout that is being syndicated to a third party. So that constantly encoded bit rates for live seems to be a winner. Because it's important to note that as live stream is being ingested and proxied to an intermediary, we want to be able to maintain QoS as much as possible. And those are my use cases. That's it, guys. So guys, if you have any questions, I'll be over here on the side. Obviously, there's a lot more to Zype than just practical applications. There's a whole platform. We're here in our booth, and meet me over here by the big shiny light. Thanks, guys.